land rights reform, and actually violence treated to the inland sexually and sexually Italy, the custody and restriction in Italy, overall that caused extinction markings in 60, vegetarian human extinction very rapidly, that's the massive amount of comments in the air, extinction trains, like there's one of the trains, now water wars, also go nuclear liner in 90, only just only social together, extension of water supplies are, of course, when I ship my international attention within the 60,000 nuclear warheads, now Supreme Court conclusion of international human rights norms, Salter, international acceptance, U.S. judicial influence makes the system better, Newman, and for the consideration of international norms, benefit education, new how, grow up, personal, information, will, engage on balance, commercial, court, the accordance to finding sexual rights, the limit of music, she's on mighty, influence justice, political will, world, maker, constitutional, relevant, legislation, will, bring universes, compare the constitutional values, the regime challenges, the regime challenges to re-examine their practices of beneficial web, the national choices for your best, should want the additional organization first give, concentration of the short from the social practices, and partial quantity, international norms, and constitutional traditions that they have informed. Now, Lawrence's overrule of Bowers has been attributed to exclude prostitution and creates uncertainty about the right to privacy, legalization reduces unconstitutional and lines U.S. policy and international courts provokes, or for expansion of right to privacy, Garcia and 5, the overrule of Bowers also explicit from the rights to engage in some media like this, or to such warranty cases, having been playing level of search to defend co restoration to disarming caddies, can respond by its own spirit, the escape message to something low, the singles for saying rooted in the anonymity and sex work credit companies related, or the constitution of animus supports those to engage the effective conversation and sell the promise and lies that it's fully norms, the restoration source of time warrants for the circle, something like the European Court short question to legalize. Sort of example now, U.S. criminalization is out of line with international precedent, extending right to privacy is key element 13 U.S. as our for the customary prostitution to prostitution should. Firstly, outlawing the constitution United States with the Western Africa low, percent that makes them seem like one of the rituals any international constitution, both international warrants, secret, balancing prostitution, really fundamental international norms, from the laws, already tested that using critical evidence, the international precedent company, U.S. use every example of largely clear prostitution laws from the plan, Washington Democratic years because the like constitution principles to international courts, which will serve by making it someone should know. Extending right to privacy is key to constitutional rights consistent with past jurisprudence already. In 13 cent constitutional right to prostitution, consistent past jurisprudence is constitutional laws based on morality, right to privacy, but broadening either. Most right to privacy, two short of many subject generation, the government interest must be just financial privacy, constitution protects the permanent interests, and constitutional right to privacy position, right to privacy will be logical, but right to privacy is inevitable, it's key to democracy, Goldman and 12. The English requires that the right to privacy warrants, the right to privacy is expanded law, approach community, interpret appropriating dominant the history, tradition, the application, proven, objection, right, regular justice, involved the conflicts based on election, the problem is that inconsistent with the constitution, there's no background, the headlessy, unimportant nature, charges for that, nation's majority control states, especially when yesterday was white wealthy, straight out, the only the rights received international because historically that these constitutional rules, protector of minority interests, inconsistent with the anti-majoritarian purpose, some traditions, reflecting various prejudice, or inequality, information, not mechanically follow this, recommendation results of right to privacy, democracy, solve WMD conflict, and extinction, help 11, democratic governments more likely to avoid increase that versus security development, and avoid famines less than become consultation conference of wars, democratic states, property, dealing with the personal friction of unity, democracy, principle for adaptive policy necessary to bring the path out to work and make it, whether efforts succeed. Now the plan, the United States should conclude that prohibitions on selling sex violate the rights to privacy, contention to is trafficking, Russian organized crime causes accidental nuclear use to follow, in the Russian crime the rights of members after the work expressed in Russia, Australia, and United States nuclear systems, we can secure safeguard development's prospect, for criminal persons, materials, laboratories, and accidental launches at an all-time high. Russian organized crime causes expansionism into Kazakhstan, Dulak, in 113 Kazakhstan, the exposed Russian organized crime country, government structure under the authoritarian insurance is becoming cut them instead, systematic organized crime, taking back the person reform 2 weeks of influence of wealth initiatives Russian criminals may for Venezuela, soils for Kazakhstan, country investment rankings, and Barcelona progress and corruption. Now that causes Central Asia war, Russian economy in 14, Kazakhstan with the proposition of Russian constitution war, Jews reacts in the heart of the Eurasian Kazakhstan Gulf, relations with the EU, China, Russia, and security potential integration of nation member countries, state of priority, global democracy, forcing human rights, and Kazakhstan approach to norms of the country more stable and secure this, and also regional security like terrorism, drug trafficking, organized crime, secret border management, the whole region, Kazakhstan being a valued partner for every country in the world. That causes great power war blank. In 12 years, among US, Russia, India, China for central local measures actually was soliciting US military involvement, not Russia, China. We see naked land grabs, we might potentially the involvement in the great power of the French was great powers. The land free facility every state is jockeying for power. The heading will have to be filled with extra human regional actions heading James West Grand Field Wars China. These intensified competition. Now trafficking funds Russian organized crime white. Enforcing no crime plays criminal human trafficking or white trafficking contingents in the US become lucrative in the trials to become successful in creating such trafficking. Crime interests safer than drug trafficking. As well as president trafficking response to become for crime for Russian. Mafia due to high profit margin. Now trafficking causes widespread Moldovan instability of Europe, the trafficking affects economic stability and help prevent intolerance against American leadership in conversion of organized crime and trafficking to stable and second institutional rule and human rights trafficking are in the international order. Moldovan instability spills over to Europe and their economic stability causes war. Rajavsky in 12, the Moldovans border imperials war regional integration versus conflict, which makes region for crisis vacuum on the border of the EU, challenges economic stability, no countries become the main cold factors, force growing crisis, extinction, Elliot in 76 in flight, military measures shut one, another result in illegal escalation to defeat the adversary war, objective escalation, rapidly nuclear future escalation, spell extinction, highly, escalation, Commission when doing so would be willing to accept such an EU economic growth solves for multiple existential threats, Zelensky, and one makes it burden in the United States common threats, terrorist control, aggressive terrorism, proliferation, destruction, and resources needed, and import contribution from Europe, be it in a crisis across Europe from the US, EU relations, serious eruption of oil, would cause severe economic dislocation, flows, and civil use of, adversaries could use nuclear knowledge, technological weapons, terrorist, or information warfare, and within that the US, Europe, and represents capturing the US and to place their responsibility to play the right for global invasion, and special capabilities that contribute especially to resource space, such tactical, recon, or electronic first was the early warning. Now, U.S. legal selling causes widespread global adoption, refers anti-trafficking leadership, solves Manova, High-Gazing, Taggy, sexual penis, foreign policy, national security, issue, victim, such man, security, prohibition of all trafficking, British reform is into 2 years after prostitution, zero by 50%, and purchasing decreased by 75%. So, over attractive market for trafficking in countries where purchasing criminalized trafficking thrive. The prostitution Denmark, where it's legal purchase the double, the Swedish compromise 27.6 can reduce prostitution and countries with victim-centered approach. The counter-trafficking approach increases use credibility, not useful amount for their nation states, but local locals for Europeans, our foreign policies, the U.S. establishes the inclusion funding, increases subsidies, international freedom of the U.S. market, and drug housing, foreign mix, and effective model of home is unclear. Constitution commits that trafficking, broadly trade, and corporation country, just that religion will authority versus also truth. The U.S. can demonstrate that constitutional legitimacy, anti-trafficking efforts will also increase the government's religion knowledge, prostitution, not only and should counsel within it, other kind of trafficking missions. Now, this is reverse causal. The plan and U.S. hypocrisy by harmonizing domestic political with international affairs laws. The U.S. do have a victim-centered approach. Peter said in 13, the U.S. is already apathetic to citizens and reflect the national country judging and trafficking. On the other hand, the U.S. prostitutes the U.S. and as a reputation sanction for governments progressing trafficking persons countries, and extrasensually in the USA, this makes trafficking players and privileges by hypocrisy not must be in. Trafficking enforcing anti-trafficking reputation is damage for them. Now, U.S. approach solves best has to be victim-centered. Chicago 13 traffickers are identification country shape the trafficking within the Palmer remote. The U.S. country for trafficking the EPA exam. The U.S. legislation international human rights trafficking centers. The prostitution false prosecution of protection legislation and role that against trafficking the mission of trafficking holds of the nation Campbell Palermo. Living to victim-centered approach. The U.S. rules will enforce no trafficking and comply with the nationwide further. Also, no terms. The anti-trafficking efforts are failing now because of a lack of U.S. leadership. Victim-centered approaches the heights and tag the anti-trafficking being the most restrictive and the most important subject trafficking addressing the law between trafficking and prostitution. There's restrictions between enforcement models and restricting those me. People most comply victim-centered pieces of their really better charters. The traffickers and subject patients to be faced with potential action gain. There's cooperation with the treatment for police trafficking become traffickers victims to acceptable prosecuting traffickers victims approaches. Approaches are the policy, the policy targeted enforcement policies victims. Are they supposed to take your trouble during sexual victims? Are some criminal justice and increase vulnerability victims? You receive only after some expunge the restricted options. Enable traffickers. Working enable traffickers. Just like.
We'll take a good credit.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Well, we have specific evidence in the internal link that in the case of Europe, particularly with Russian organized crime, prostitution is the first and foremost concern. Even if there are sort of other issues like drugs, the plan sufficiently reduces revenue.
Sorry, it's hard to pronounce. Definitely mentions drug trafficking.
Yeah, and also we have evidence from the Weiss evidence. Hold on, the Weiss evidence says human trafficking, mainly for prostitution, has become the preferred crime.
You got your quote. You got your quote. Now my turn to read the quote. The triad has been very successful in creating cells. Trafficking has become the crime of choice. And then you say it's safer than drug trafficking, so it's based on safety that motivates them to do that?
That's probably one of many words.
Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and ask about totally unrelated stuff. So, where does the right to privacy come from?
There's a couple of constitutional foundings for it. One,
I meant internationally. Like, which treaty?
Oh, well, it's more that it's...
argument isn't treaty-based.
Yeah, right, it's CIL.
Where does the international right to privacy come from? You mentioned IHRL.
Well, a perfect example of it is when the Lawrence decision was decided, Kennedy cited international rules regarding
what international
rule? No. Our argument is not at all about treaties. The
argument
is about citation of another country's law, i.e. when Breyer, writing the Lawrence decision, says this is based on a lot of European countries and then integrates other countries into the ground.
Okay. Right. I have have some other things I want to ask about. So you have this Feldman card. Where does it mention prostitution or privacy?
That's the impact. We didn't want to like give away the intro.
The alliances argument. Which alliances can we impact turn?
Well, I don't.
Can
You
we
can't
get
impact any because alliances are inevitable. We just make them effective, right?
Well, where does Ross says that we need to have these alliances? Where does it say the inevitable versus effective distinction? Like, why can't we read NATO back?
This line only by enmeshing capabilities. Do you
Because
want me to read this line?
NATO doesn't have a right to privacy.
What does that have to do with you reading an
The
alliance?
plan creates alliances with countries that have a
How
right
do you
to
get to
privacy.
water?
How do we get to water?
Yeah.
Our argument is that if the U.S. can successfully shape international law because we're no longer perceived as hypocrites, we can push sort of regional water sharing agreements.
When has the U.S. ever cared about the right to water? Why would we
Our evidence
focus
actually
on
says that in the status quo they're pushing these things in places like Uzbekistan and Costa Rica, but because of bad international law,
that? I have another privacy-related question. What does that right not include?
what do you
Like, ostensibly, child pornography is not covered in the right to
Well,
privacy.
given that the
That
affirmative
is
is
very much not included.
No, I agree it's not
Given that-
included. My question is, what else is not included? I gave you an obvious example. Give me
the plan extends right to privacy to prostitution.
nothing else. There is no spillover from this right whatsoever.
Well, Lawrence already made it super broad, just not in the case of prostitution.
None of our
So
arguments said
there's
that.
no uniqueness for your account.
Gotcha.
3 off, advantage 2, advantage 1.
I'm sorry, you said 2-1?
Yep.
I just got it. Sorry.
Great. Does everyone have what they need?
Yep.
All or nearly all means all, but with the possibility of an extraordinary exception is distinct from most federal legislation. One, this requires that all or nearly all mean a requirement. The intention is that only requirements the or nearly all language would permit the extraordinary situation. One might not qualify nearly all does not mean most or nearly all are intended right. We recognize the possibility of exceptional circumstances. Legalizing prostitution means both buying and selling. They don't legalize nearly all shapes in 14 legal response prostitution ever arisen. Decriminalization, legalization, decrim, partial. Decriminalization makes both the sale and purchase of sex illegal. Legalization makes both the sale and purchase of sex legal, but brings it under regulation. Decrim makes the purchase illegal. Decriminalizing the sale of voting issue. One is limits allowing huge topic areas, carve-outs, and predictable and dramatically expands the number of acts on an enormous bias topic. Second is net ground. They've started the core prostitution controversy and the literature about legalization. The counterplan, the United States should include the prohibitions on selling sex violate equal protection, constitute equal protection violations, criminalization of prostitution constitutes a violation. Again, in 93 cases, should get equal protection laws, enforced prostitution laws, police have seen 100% not so as many women are arrested in that. Arrested in that way, another practice is arresting accused prostitutes while letting arrested customers men go. The right to privacy is a legal linchpin of patriarchy. Protections are not equal for women. Phillips 98, one reason solution women from universal argument goes under the separation of private and public and liberal theories have applied to all individuals in the same way the liberal idea of non-intervention reinforced inequalities in the nature of the right to privacy has been heavily influenced by patriarchal liberalism. The right to privacy underlying the law of laws husbands not wives assumes the notion that a wife felt within privacy for a sexual relation of being recognized and handed here within the States of the United States. The full protection is still not provided by law for many forms of privacy. May be the most dangerous of all places. It causes rampant sexual violence. McKinnon 93, the right to privacy is often included among the civil rights. Many privacy comes down with free or public scrutiny. The private is defined as a place of freedom effectively rendered consensual, but women are forced to do prostitution as those referred to as a crime and government before consenting. As ultimate result of the extend the privacy from sex to sexual abuse and prostitution. Women have no space they can call off lunch. Next counterpoint. The United States should conclude that prohibitions on same-sex marriage violate the right to privacy. Moral justifications and animus do not limit the right to privacy established in Lawrence versus Texas or constitute the rational basis necessary to distinguish conduct falling within the Lawrence versus Texas exception. The right to sell sex in the United States is not protected by the right to privacy because of the state's legitimate interest in preventing coercion. The United States should adopt a rehabilitative approach to prostitution, substantially expanding social services to facilitate access from prostitution and mandate that all persons arrested for prostitution are sent to prostitution for a home-selling board that diverted attenders to these services instead of incarceration. The the United States should advocate the prostitution court model internationally as a viable victim-centered means of reducing sex trafficking and solve their precedent prostitution IQ Marcus and sex organized marriage case deal with over uniting on China and active liberation affirmed by the Lawrence Prize opportunity grants sexual level principles of relations to race privacy is broadly recognized as a source of raising married parties individuals against state imposed stigma. If the court were to recognize the homoracial marriage applies the same-sex couples such as revolutionary movement from marriage to sex and back to marriage against sexual revolution or privacy rights will continue these leading and many intimately related principles many full constitutional protection of autonomy, dignity, respect for all individuals, which must ensure not just rights, privacy, individuals, management, life choices, but the autonomy of all individuals, their self-identities and intimate partnerships, both in the public as well as private context. The plan's right to sexual privacy would be effectively applied to both buyers and sellers, and Father Garcia and 546 explicitly said the final word of safetless incorrectly defining the right of homosexuals to engage outside of despite these social language course of narrow Lawrence by sending it to the president. Present peace is not about prostitution, is not about form of recognition, any relation to that homosexual person. Center courts I use those passages and I extension of Lawrence as protection against criminal conviction for private sexual acts and I recognize the same marriage in the United States. Those cases express a resistance to expect past the holding of Lawrence beyond its factual scenarios to declare constitutionally protects the right to sexual privacy. Law lawyers hold that the state cannot make private sexual conduct a crime distinctly true for the private sexual conduct of buyers and sellers. Criminalizing prostitution doesn't create a loophole. The second plain solves their uncertainty and exception. Rabbit hole arguments Christensen, 1AC author 14D. Crime against intercepted is mental being sex workers coming against injured law crime prostitutes are charged with illicit prostitution permanent. Them to send felony law criminals and appropriate legal levels of punishment based on the offender's sexually, these arguments just regulation of any crimes associated with subject conduct such regulation need not drama or child violence be scrutiny of the all identical things that activity laws or regulations of sex or development because they ensure sex workers are not being exploited, but this is not advanced by laws that categorize based on procreative or non-procreative sex or adverse city St. Paul provides a framework to effectively ensure with lawyers ambiguity reference the government from prescribing speech because it disproves of the ideas of exception not under categories of this where the constitutional lawyers can be understood in a similar manner the government regularly conduct that fails the Lawrence exception so avoid harm and may not take place conduct ours that of constitutional protection by creating distinctions based on moral morality morals constitute the rational basis necessary to introducing the actual and non-procreative sex, even though that conduct occurs within a Lawrence exception by rejecting animals based on law, Lawrence incorporates equality principles. Prostitution boards eliminate stigma and solve the Jacobson 14 of Prop 7 for which are greater than the social esteem for defense. The skills make a life outside prostitution police are already fire response on like the crimes that some personal person not sent in jail, biblical criminals, unable to access social research of police service and catalyst for access to services. The court would be less adversarial. The model also protects trying to realize that often such a bridge the gap between the victim and criminal labels, presently prostitutions that all participants need to be accountable. They also need help. Law enforcement serves as first responders for prostituted youth and separates victims from third-party exploitation to allow prosecution to attempt to count themselves trafficking. Jacob 14. Law enforcement is able to physically locate the service office for the first responder role or role of organization cannot fill the victims understand that they have a chance to receive help from Medina Center Fund or breaking fair program that also only prostitution of this over decriminalized women will lose a valuable intervention point because things can keep reselling women to make more money. They just become prosecuted, otherwise they will find that other women are trials to exploit. The separation is essential. Now the case legalization increases trafficking, curbs both legalization by the two-year system. That's consistently left to face who's been better than no one's Austria and Germany all results in increases in prostitution, no regulation of violence, persistent women, so violence and assault are the norm in prostitution, whether legal or illegal. They must see as many crimes as they can to run a proper prostitution. Nevada state profiles are worse than many they imprison women are not protected by the state. Living and landlords makes them more visible. Women can be more violent relationship increase where prostitution legal in Germany have the highest numbers increasing bill buyers, increases demand, which is met by trafficking rates of child prostitution and trafficking have flourished by high rates of child prostitution and trafficking in Nevada. Prostitutes believe legalizing prostitution benefits the state above all. Cross-national data proves show 13 the scale of 50 listeners are turning you all the substitution effects for businessmen for trafficking prostitution very legal residents or quantity of critical analysis of 150 countries shows the scale of economic substitution effect countries that legalized prostitution experience a larger trafficking and those are central finding is less based on the most reliable data. The scale effect outweighs the substitution effect show 13 empirical findings indicate that the scale effect extension of legalization done in the substitution effects away from human trafficking. Speaking of prostitution, the number of prostitutes decreased substantially. The generally rate of the market contracted as a buyer which criminal charges the network so employed prostitution. The number of trafficking victims in network is more than 4 times that is with the share trafficking individuals fairly similar to scope of property and the other trafficking prostitution. The substitution effects like the small Germany is one of the largest markets. The number of human trafficking victims in the Isle of West is about 62 times more than Sweden. There's all causes of organized crime, drug trafficking.
Actually, let's move on to the other.
I'm just going to move on to the other advantage now. Scratch that all cause or two, straight to I law fails you 14. The UN-centered system is filled Russia, tremble on the fundamental norm of the current system fails to maintain peace and the things are very powerful. The problems with learning leaders, black formula, resource science, and anything is pros now and obviously less than innovation of Georgia units, rules and average law, the local economic and great powers, collective security, navigation of these rules only contain boxes, walls, targeting, single black, trouble, United States, policies, response, and invasion of Ukraine. Judges don't follow precedent. Palmer and actors are distributed. Precedent usually friend over funding case of an access over the more minimal amount of case that what how they can rule what they want. Judges simply avoid unfriendly precedents, ignore the right to privacy. Judges saturated and useless rights are Posner 14. The central embrace as a law so ambiguous ambiguity not a result of how these terms are delivered. Shows your treat to worldly fine obligation most countries are religion, worship, or privacy. They short finding a variety of these rights can provide no guidance. The government's court high law rulings cause congressional backlash. Turns the case Posner 19. Is a period that holds the dealing with regulation and very compliance with the law. The opposite in the case of respect by withdrawing from the protocol and the U.S. Supreme Court bank by reading the mass effect treaty. U.S. law violator withdraw from law when the government wants that kills hegemony, ensures the advantage will consent for international law shall have judicial reason go on judges without any version by Congress said make such customary dealing with entirely different countries. Justice must not waive sua sponte into international law. It is important that the United States speak with one and not multiple voices in foreign affairs. There's a lot of the principal implementation of the executive military matters are included by judicial degree courts go too far where they rely upon international precedent more resolving contentious issues. Rights are doomed globally. Posner 14 or 9 court treaties able to negative body religious descendants are persecuted versus Philippines, Russia, Turkey, Venezuela, backward against all troops rights are taken. Public use is found in the U.S. which uses torture and continues to kill civilians have lost its moral. There's also an the treaty power also solves UNH, today's terms of recognition, proliferation, and transformation of defense of northern highly public centrality treaties of foreign affairs treaty interpretation is very central in how the responsible proliferation of legal status of all practical responsibility towards foreign affairs powers given the rest of the foreign policy, but it's ensured they are sensitive to block policies with which it disagrees. Extinction, Croningen, Charles the party defended nuclear upon the increased nuclear war force less result of state attack on their increased over the Commonwealth part of control results in accidental negotiating driven any crisis which rational states run over real risk nuclear war optimist ignores the leaders operate under competing pressures. We have seen places on the highway and W and long companies of global fighting increase the risk of accidental nuclear war. There's not internal links to the water scenario. They don't have spillover evidence as it implicates the broader right to water. Norman ruling on one instance of privacy spills over to solve international law writ large. They're stopping the cross-examination and they're backpedaling from this proves that they don't spill over to create a sustainable precedent into the compound submission itself.
Counterpunch conditional.
Status quo is always a logical option.
Can you kick flags?
Ellis?
Yes.
Okay, net benefits are the trafficking turns and the internal net benefits?
True.
Any of like the presidential power stuff? Or
I don't know.
Iowa stuff's not a net benefit.
Iowa stuff
Cool.
is not a net benefit.
I want to ask about the pick.
Iowa stuff is not a net benefit, no.
I want to ask about the pick. What amendments equal protection?
What amendment is equal protection? I think it's 14. Yeah.
Okay, so here's where I'm confused then. 14th Amendment, Section 5.1 is the right to privacy. The counterplan literally rules on the plan plus.
Section 5.
Not plan plus, we probably just exclude the privacy parts.
No, that's not in the counterplan text is do it on equal protection, 14th Amendment.
Sure.
14th Amendment includes right to privacy plus some other business. How does it solve the internal net benefit?
Non-privacy parts.
That's not.
What? That's not in the counterplan text.
It's probably modified.
What?
It's a new act, we're gonna do what we want.
It's not.
Modified.
It's not in
This
the,
last round.
no, we were like,
New advantage, new plan. I think that's
Which
oh,
section?
it's
Which section were you talking about? I got the 14th Amendment right here.
it's 5.1.
5.1.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move on.
All persons born in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens in the state in which they reside.
You
This
can-
state shall make or enforce
here.
state law which shall avert
You literally-
the needs of the citizens.
If you go to the Stanford Legal Institute, just seriously Google 14th Amendment and you
I've literally got the text.
I'm gonna move on.
Here,
I appreciate it. I'm gonna move on. Link turns a case with literally 0 cards about the plan. What evidence do you think is about the Nordic model?
The Nordic model?
Yeah, that's
Or
the
is
act.
it just about the legalization of prostitution and it says data across
So
every
you
possible
have,
country?
so
Or is
just to
it-
be clear, you have no cards about the
But it's
straight
data-
turn
but it's
advantage.
data- definitely
across
do.
countries that legalize both buying and selling. They legalize prostitution.
We have
and
read evidence that
prostitution.
cites the legalization of prostitution in every instance or show up that says 150 different data sets, which
Here you
is
go.
not
So
show
is then
data.
saying that's why we should do the Swedish model, which what the affirmative is.
And RF cites
Your,
the
hold
other
on.
substances
Your
that
curve
not
evidence cites Nevada, Netherlands, Australia, and Germany.
The
Which
show
one
up
of
is
those?
based on 150 countries, which is inclusive
Oh,
of
so
those
Curva
subsets.
sucks, but you have the show evidence.
Show substantiates the broader claim made by Curva,
Sure.
and
I
it's
wanna-
a more robust data
I want to
set
ask
that
about
substantiates
this
Curva.
other counterplan. What is right to privacy extended to?
This is an Ellis question.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
The other counterplan, what is right to privacy besides same-sex marriage or fiat extended to? It seems very nebulous and vague.
Pretty much everything but prostitution. The
Yeah,
reason
so
prostitution
yeah,
is
like
included
what?
is because the state has a legitimate interest in preventing
You're
coercion.
not
The
answering
same
the
way
question.
they do with preventing child
But
pornography
what?
or other things.
Ellis, you're just
You're telling me what it's not. What is it?
Yeah, everything but prostitution and
What is
Give me
something
one
that's not
example.
prostitution?
If you pick out prostitution, because the state has a legitimate
Yeah, so
interest
what
in
does it
preventing coercion.
include? What part of the, you said it's a plan inclusive counter plan. What
Literally
part
all
of the
the things
plan,
you create
other
rights
than
to. I'm sorry, privacy. The text is very clear on that.
So,
And yet you
any,
still not-
just so I'm clear, one more, just real quick. Any area
So we
that
say-
could possibly be privacy, you apply it to.
We say the right is the exact same minus prostitution because the state has a legitimate interest. in
Okay,
preventing
back to this, when I see cross question. You're like, right to privacy theoretically can protect child porn. Does the counterclaim protect child porn?
only if the act does.
Whoa. Wow, okay.
Just in my, it's just like the very first heading in that file. It's just like and there's one that's like specific. Just the normal file, not things.
What's the link to treaty power?
Sua sponte, who rule without an explicit precedent.
Ruling without an explicit precedent means that the court has treaty power?
So you rule without an explicit precedent, which causes the court to intervene in something that solely falls under the auspices of the executive.
And
Is
that
this
spills
the-
over to
is
treaty
this-
power?
Test case, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, not precedent, test case.
Which
The
card
link
is
is,
this?
the link is court action bed,
I know which card is this.
But I'm asking, how does that spill over to treaty?
because it's something that, you know, the court action interferes with the executive, which is our claim, and that's something that solely falls under the auspices of the executive. That's the first card, Cosmo.
Thank you.
High school kid, this is the one I'm making my friend to answer his questions. Email address. Right.
Some of those like.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have 3 times.
And you should probably.
I also try to stop people in class.
Hold on. Yeah.
Good?
I'll read this one.
We're good.
626. Thank you.
Can you read the order on the second email? It's trafficking, court advantage, topicality,
I'm sorry, I was gonna stop and do it again.
trafficking, court advantage, topicality. The counterclaim includes distinguishing and problem-solving courts, and then the alternate ground counterclaim.
Did you say 1 or 2? I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
It's-
Trafficking first, so advantage two first.
I'm sorry?
Advantage two first.
No, on the counterclaim.
The second counterclaim first, then the first.
I've already characterized it. Okay.
I'm sorry, Mark. Alright, the first counterclaim you're talking about is
The one that includes the distinguished claim
the super long.
and the problem-solving courts, and then the labor protection.
Walk out of the room.
Long and short.
So long and short is,
Oh, sorry, before you say I accepted down the card.
no, she will not the the child of God, such a right to use someone right to leave, right to second, right to legally, just will be authorities, they have not already effective and they, and then our Russian, escalation guaranteed extinction, EU economy is critical, total, full of existential threats and collapse, EU stability, guaranteed exposure to a nuclear war, dealing with court, and exchange in court, what?
Show goes there.
Cho also goes deeper with the award is that all we said Cho concludes that Swedish not the best of itself now the Court of International Law feels there evidence is assumptive this has quoted the U.S. Bush is able to make a fact of that is the fellow in the Newman evidence judges will follow precedent that is that they don't have enough evidence to the alternate grounds covered than the plan is sufficient none our agreements are based on court precedent but rather U.S. incorporation of international law means that other countries will then incorporate our law and solve U.S. push abroad which means irrelevant they say more right to private encounters that have constant yes right now for different rights is our argument that's why commonality within law is key here to make in other countries also that they will take in our law does not cause congressional law backlash there's no first of all there's no link to any of these arguments engaged in international law doesn't mean that it's by mere citation whose U.S. influence doesn't lead to transparency and failure to engage in the U.S. institution out of step behind the consequences we have with each other will have a joint significant ability of the U.S. want to infiltrate and show dialogue and develop an international legal constitution interpretation three one is supposed to be united something to be found neither way to push the lines of translation on by using full self public able to engage in reducing the ability of conversation here right decision as one sovereignty over the decision to run defensive local decisions for the authority and level to be right nation fair to Canada or reason depending U.S. federal authorities foreign law organization is stable justice and use one less unconsciously the only use of the justice for ready to use and be so forth they should in their occasions such as the person faces arbitrary and the targeted to like the suggestion to make the foreign to the only key social influence of decision from great vital needs and exercise of power that so mean that our internal in terms of congressional Germany impact there's no core backlash to the affirmative level 92 the poor people around us on the constitutional arrest that are considerably what's going to rather than defending factors way well the position by the journalist and company just making you international national set we reform journal the assaults anyway so show attack by less than 11 there's no having support of the U.S. Second International Forces of the Group of People the U.S. Department of State any action with the States and all forces of regional BLCD all the evidence of our rights sense of reaction which U.S. suggests that people should certainly know police and the answers there are other reactions to the other answers or other impact as well they say rights to regime the plan so it's already explained by that it's water wars there evidence is some type of a time when international law was sufficient to solve the see is on the blink there evidence was assumed Soviet bioweapons which are likely to escalate that cause the exchange and that is the Martians of its presidential treaty this literally makes no sense how would the plan spill over to the president not having any treaty power the plan
Conceded democracy plus
there's no sort of content until 1990 or as long as trade deciding nations sort of content posted action or offsets that part of the world part of their own for the country jurisprudence to happen raised by their parties they conceded only right to privacy praise a forward-looking constitution that's also majoritarian is critical solving democracy the impact of the change in that is the helper evidence now Topicality
they say no spillover
oh yeah they said no spillover that was so that takes up account of the not the affirmative already explained above the plan is just by U.S. push for international now Topicality meaning completely lies the constitution also lifting prohibition of the constitution like criminalize abolition constitution so that prohibited subject of legal prostitution legal with the Chinese companies law situation but there are prohibited prostitution offering these sex related activities are separate Harry in the case of the prostitution offering self action after a high below state prohibited offering sexual money state prohibited constitutional prostitution related actions taking pending and what are the questions of the custody of less social legal state prohibited factorized and strategic after almost sustainable policy and constitutional is having started limited by or when part of the topic education consensus state legal terms of permanent excluding that the courts of literature resolution and explicitly the by prostitution that means common definitions of why that's selling in England and 15 mission laws that private prostitution dictionary definition of vice in the act of knowing sexual rape and prostitution common difference high done legal crime to and the person made a constitution role legal persistent DA goes affirmative legal for use legal 14 prostitution sex record high extending payment reports for payment there's a introduction of human act of the different kind of constitution of revision mobilized starving against aliens on harboring and there's none the urban says that legalization requires removing proven down by your prostitution related solves much far better to let me from private scope to be pits we so limits better than interpretation while 3017 relevant to see prostitution has each with multiple subcategories within them where ours is just 12 Kelly in a the kind of support track of physical regulations like right about human activity about the soldier those couple of such as legal creative forces of depression legal certain kinds of mental victimization for the local movement from the overall policy of nomination ground is an establishing universal stable mechanism civil rights selling sex legal insurance legalized every regularly turns your arguments anyways the legalization to aid prohibition roles and prohibition for legalization is legal prohibition shift legal set legal nearly all is the largest part of 94 editor but definition legal all evidence is all the largest part we need that free to free ensure 50 prostitution act no property selling insurance like prostitution prosecuted commercial usually not visibility is that's going to be never be interpretation confusion, Fisher, if I listen to my house, reports of the action of the questions that narrowly would be regarded as following the law, of course, the future gets more like the separate and then, of course, the uniform approach of the problem solving, of course, doesn't apply to our sources of plans and apply to our sources, making a recommendation of a plan and is the case of Rome to the plan of the problem solving, of course, as far as the problem plan is key to that. So, all the benefit doesn't solve the prostitution and criminals and the law and ethnic doesn't solve right to privacy either, and the problem solving, of course, failed the after another strategy quantified the judgment of such proceed to address prostitution around the grace of falls, restoration of course, and then message over the solves proceedings and point of course, and be involved in the Topicality, the spirit of the separation, one of prostitution, one of the disparity, speaking approaches, like, the original voice of the respect the sexual autonomy, service order, the control of the criminal process, to receive the amount of life from the system, marginalize the for the people who seek sex and reduce the sex structure, the benefits of the ongoing structure, the rejection, and when sex is very second, no different from prostitution, and even how we see the supported to uplift, and now the alternate balance counterplan purge you bullshit, since also when purge you the counterplan is just a clarification of the plan, it's going to cause that counterplan should be textually functionally competitive key to division of affirmative negative rights, obstacle control, and division right to privacy can be held over the counterplan, ultimately energy privacy is fundamental rights and that because of the sexual reports of various components of constitution, federal privacy, and benefit of the rights to privacy, possible and 14, non-discriminatory order which demonstrates the future of the responsibility to solve the office, and if the understand and the rights of the counterplan, or if the NDT equal protection doesn't solve the affirmative order, then benefit leslie 5e, the protection of the race, sex, circumvention, because the general military, professional, law, gender, neutral, also providing show that sexual law, the general social, also, now, it's not to public likely price of stand, because there's release of how much work is the right access, not so there is claim this for ready to let the individual shut down on it, anytime the right to privacy critique is wrong, it doesn't connect by zero percent privacy and excuse for inaction. The plan is the opposite to expand individual women's rights going into the whole private from the local class and rights, privacy knowledge, like saying in the basic community, and social cops to all for the privacy and process of conception of the law, alright, or privacy or company, I have no help with analysis, and some other actually like personal privacy that, is private understanding, things like the justification of the privacy, all the social perceptions, gender, privacy, came to a tenant that needs to support privacy, and then we said, Canadian liberty, and one on new grants that, and section of republic, and centralized privacy, providing insurance, and she has the capacity of following up, and privacy, that's all clear, personal person privatization, that, all the right to remote, and all the insurance, all the section, the station, revenue, sex, and opportunity, the future far, all the racial capacity, democracy will be uncertain for ethics and consequences, that is the most ethical action, because it can swim out instrumental in terms of impact, equal protection, puts the cart before the horse, individual right to privacy, that's your constitutional norm, enforce equally clone into feminist knowledge, argue the struggle, and also equal oppressive conditions that are preferring equal protection job to be, or you seek to secure privacy, guys, having self-restraint now, the homogeneous of the action, avalanche, restrict clause in the privacy law, non-neutral and restricted application, right to application.
The first line of
Sorry,
Fat
can I
White.
mark this for a moment?
Yeah.
Okay, you're good.
First line of Fat White's quote: "There is no evidence to support a direct relationship between U.S. activism and international stability." Why do you have an F?
Our argument is
U.S.
not about-
exports law, U.S. norms
No,
good.
no. That is about hard power, the
What's the
affirmative.
difference? Fat White is explicitly about U.S. activism and broader
No,
stability.
it's about U.S. military activism, not U.S. diplomatic activism,
What's
which
the
is a
distinction
distinction
between
with a
diplomatic
different.
and military activism?
Well, because
Fat
all of our
White's
impacts are
can't
based upon cooperation, i.e. the U.S. cannot go it
Okay.
alone, which is a direct quote from the ONEC, that we need other countries to support us because the U.S. military is insufficient. The sentence also says that withdrawal of the U.S. military would not cause any impact, but rather that we need diplomatic
Okay, I have a
withdrawal.
totally
Insufficient
separate
evidence.
question.
Avery evidence that is the Ross evidence.
Okay, Margaret, thank you. Kerba says approach number 2, follow the Swedish model, increase penalties for Johns. Then there's the rest of the card. The app obviously can't topically increase penalties for Johns.
You're
How
right.
do you access this
But the
card?
functional
Which is
result
followed
of the
Swedish
plan is
model.
that there's only penalties for Johns, which means that the police focus is only
But
upon the
Kerba
Johns.
makes the claim that you need to, quote, increase the
No,
penalties.
Curva does not. I read the entirety of the Curva article.
Approach number 2, increase the penalties.
conclusion of the article is that demand strategies are best, which is fundamentally what the
Where
affirmative
have you
is.
read this conclusion in this debate?
It's highlighted in the card. It said conclusion, demand must be targeted. I think maybe it didn't say
And
exactly.
then
Demand
approach
must
number 2 was increase penalties for Johns.
Approach number 2 is a Swedish model, which
Okay.
includes increasing.
Okay, Duthel, where does Duthel define a term in the resolution? Just a
Duthel
line.
defines what prohibition is, and our rules evidence says that legalization is the
Well,
removal.
a question about prohibition. So prohibition is not in the res. Rules is about drugs. Why does that apply to prostitution?
Rules is about the legalization of laws.
A
Yes,
comparison
there's
of
an
the
example.
cost effectiveness of prohibition and regulation of laws. It's talking about T-crime in the context of marijuana. This is the
No, first of all, it's not about marijuana. We already had this debate. It is
You're
about.
kidding, right? It's about drugs.
Yeah, which is key to
But
topical
there's-
hearings for multiple areas.
Why is it applicable to prostitution when
Because
what
there's no
legalization
dis-
needs across different topics is different?
Could you explain to me why legalization of marijuana is removing
Okay,
prohibition,
the
but
Perry-
legalization of
Perry
prostitution
evidence
would not be removal of
Cites early
prohibition?
American
If
case
you can do that, I
Well,
feel very
totally.
comfortable.
Marijuana is only used by one person, but prostitution requires more than one person.
No, prostitution is just one person.
Perry evidence cites early American case law and how it defined prostitution. What about contemporary case law and why is early American case law predictable
Are you talking about
or a
the
better
Perry
interpretation
evidence?
of the time?
Sorry, I was listening to Ellis. Are you talking about the Perry evidence?
Early American case law broadly defined prostitution. Why is early American case law, especially when you've read a card from 1980, applicable to the current
I think
contemporary
the
context of
historical
what prostitution
analysis of how laws in the United States works is probably the most
Okay,
critical
last question. England is
interpretation
about
of what
Michigan law
prostitution
and
should
says
be.
that in Michigan, when Michigan
No,
gets
it's not just about Michigan law. It says that in
What is
Michigan it does not
prostitution?
specifically define prostitution when laws in general do not define
Okay,
what
handling
prostitution
laws in
is. The
Michigan,
general
what is
dictionary
prostitution in
definition, the
Michigan?
general dictionary definition is just the selling of sex.
So we've got, I think, like 9:30-ish?
9:29.
9:29, perfect, thank you.
The only people who were judging are the three of us. All the narrative.
is debating Oklahoma. DH is debating Minnesota.
I guess I should have maybe asked
I feel like those are kind of appropriate comments. They can have like conversations about stuff.
Urgent issue.
Alright, so small counterpoint. It's
Wait, which kind of one?
small production.
Okay, small one.
Counterpoint number 1.
I want advantage. Then big counterplan and traffic.
I'm sorry. Small counterplan, I-law, big counterplan, traffic.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Right to
It's good that you did that.
Not going for this counterplan, this conditional condo will be in the one that replaces my rights to privacy, whether or not I tell you what I'm doing for it. The net benefit itself, look and see the consequences of my ways, means I can't sugarcoat arguments. Also, the code evidence says it can't be good or bad, means you should defer to the direction of the trafficking debate, because obviously they are a good form of privacy if it causes people to be sold into sex slavery. Now the outlaw advantage will concede timing and submission, even if it's not formal or binding incorporation, is still supposed to override other arguments, not on the basis of the link argument, and proves they can establish a solvency differential for the counterplan. The counterplan does three things. First is it rules on the exact same grounds the advocate uses that offer the gay marriage issue instead of prostitution, and still uses warrants to be Texas and says moral justification should not limit that right or constitute irrational basis to create the bad exceptions, which is all other authors call for. Second is it separately rules against legalizing prostitution on the grounds that the state has a legitimate interest in preventing coercion. This would put it under the same canon as things like the child pornography example. Yes, that would be something that happens in the privacy of your own home, but clearly you don't have a right to do that, even if you have a constitutional right to privacy, because it would involve coercion. Third is prostitution courts. I'll explain that a little bit in more detail below, but in case you're unfamiliar with the concept, is that instead of allowing people convicted of prostitution or that claims to be funneled to special courts, kind of analogous to the drug court model, but much less punitive than that, because there's alternatives to incarceration that would involve rehabilitation and exit services. If you're a job in that court, if you were convicted of a nonviolent crime, you would be gone through rehab and rehabilitation and education programs that you mostly based on former prostitutes talking about the violence in the sector. Evidence says it leads to recidivism rates of 1%, creates a better human rights model. If you are a prostitute convicted in that court, there will help provide assistance and services for you to get out of the profession, which is sufficient to answer all of their arguments, because it proves that it is a victim-centered argument. Our net benefit to this is that it's key to self-trafficking, because they remove police from the equation entirely, which makes it impossible to crack down effectively. But more on that later. Now, the first argument that they make is the perjury with the links in the net benefit still establishes the right to sexual privacy in the context of prostitution. The portion of the plaintiff has rights to privacy in the context of selling sex does not preclude our counterplan argument for the trafficking team. It merely establishes in the test case that the plan employs concerns an individual selling sex. That does not speak to the legal implications of establishing a constitutional right to sexual privacy for prostitution. Irony cutting with their Garcia card cannot be more explicit on this. The exact same legal reasoning which affords privacy rights to sellers would also apply to buyers. It's an equally private situation for both individuals, so none of their trafficking linked defense makes any sense. The app's application of rights to sexual privacy risk providing a defense for traffickers, murky determination of consent to legal gray area brought in 14. The foreign protects rights to sexual activity that law has provided very narrow avenue protection for sexual deception crime rate. Obviously falls outside, but because fraud does not reach content, it can be argued in Texas at least presumably protected. It's also mutually exclusive, because our argument is that we should maintain penalties now. It's criminalization. They eliminate that, or the term is incoherent severance. It also links to all of our prostitution courts arguments, because it prevents a functioning problem-solving court to exist in the begin place. Means they link to trafficking. Jacobs at 14. Prostitution is dominated by violence. Legalization solutions are not simply practical. Children and young women being funneled into prostitution. Police remain the best first response to legalization would no longer allow them to fill that role. No other organization can deny that. Managing them effectively, police eliminating police jurisdiction would destroy law enforcement's ability to prosecute traffickers. The problem-solving court is best, while many critiques of courts are valid. They are based on attempts to expose the vice president helping the proposed court make the best opportunity to remove drugs from the record. They get not necessarily reorder the left. Room to the counterplan is all the obviously separate for all the reasons I explained above. Now the substantive argument says counterplan provides the exact same precedent of the plain and always the sexual privacy except for prostitution. I want to see Marcus that says it's the ideal test case. The fundamental right to sexual privacy is the legal basis for the right to marry across all previous court precedent on marriage from Griswold to Lawrence. And it says the decision will be a revolutionary affirmation of sexual privacy sexual privacy in those other contexts that are good. We'll go card by card through it. When I see Garcia, since of course need to shut the escape hash, clarifies this is the end of this issue I explained. Ultimately, says criminalization is problematic because it stigmatizes sex workers, which has nothing to do with perception of legal norms. And our Marcus says it explicitly says we solve that stigma. None of the other students counterplans ruling which would reinvigorate protections across a wide variety of the privacy issues. And ultimately says extending the right to prostitution is consistent with past jurisprudence, but does not say that prostitution has to be. Marcus says the counterplan is also consistent, so there's no warrant for a deficit. It's of the entirety of the Lawrence present. Also the I'm going to answer their confusion argument. They say it doesn't apply to buyers. It doesn't say in the plain text sellers but not buyers. It says precedent of the wood spillover, which is the argument I explained about. Their distinguishing backdoor takes that anyway, because if that was the instruction, the avenue only distinguishing was the counterclaim. Doesn't do so that only links to them. They're just use the exact same legal reasoning. The absence they can't make a distinction here. There Christensen evidence says there would be no loophole, which means we access it. We have the lower course too, so there's no confusion related to the Fisher DA. Also, it doesn't have to go narrowly, so it's still entrenching Bible right. It just has something that works against that right in the context of prostitution. Gay marriage is sufficient. Code 15. Courts should recognize the implementation may have a labor. Judgments are started with as much attention to down court. Courts against the rights of which this court's decision is not decision will certainly influence other rights of building the six ways and I say 6 years of resolution human rights as well. Effectively, it seems to be seen as global leader. Now the prostitution court's argument, they don't apply to our specific model, disregard them. Jacobson 14. Private actors never reason to be involved in the court, such as numbers provided, thus local anti-vice performance model, not have control of court and the welfare as its primary goal, but be more successful. The court would not focus on meaningless basic work and community service, but instead meaningful treatment advice. Legalization makes enforcement of anti-trafficking laws impossible. Anti-trafficking statutes are too hard to enforce. Anti-prostitution laws are easier. I just said, because sex trafficking cases are difficult to prove without enforcement, trafficking will never face consequences. Laws may provide the next best means of prosecuting traffickers. The laws would provide a deterrent solicitation laws for enforcing purchases. Market trafficking would decrease substantially with 1.3 million missing. The response by relying on trafficking laws cannot be effectively leveraged. Must be a more flexible and consequent versatile strategies. Linking prostitution to criminalization is key to police support for victims and prosecuting sex traffickers means that church transport international arguments 2, day 12. Sweden shows that with special actually scratch that card because it's obviously not Sweden. Trafficking debate. Impact. Conceded. Hi now. Counterplay solved. Swedish model stuff. First, basic links. Legalization substantially expands trafficking, whether partially decriminalized or not. 3 arguments. 1 is the illegal market. The plain claims an illegal sector for prostitutes who don't meet the legal regulations. Cover assess this expands trafficking because victims fill the gap. 2, demand is substantially expands overall demand for prostitution, which means the scale of the sector will rapidly increase. That is true. Third is empiric show with sex for countries that legalize since over 150 countries. That is the overwhelming effect. Or show evidence compares the substitution effect and the scale effect, which means they can't win a link turn. Also, legalization breaks the anti-trafficking movement. A what is released from research. Who's been 14 not legalizing regulating brothels, criminalizing trafficking. That judge the hope to fight the trafficking more effectively, regulatory enforcement. So, brothels depend on police and business remains. Many characterizations of the legitimate arc that hinders regulation, monitoring police rely upon the info provided by regulators. Regulation is in the legalized sector from the view of the criminal justice while trafficking. So, by the legal design, less section monitoring the regulated sector drains capacity away, thus preventing the police from unregulated prostitution, legal limitations, hinder collaboration. The victim identification traffickers will use the app as a shield. Home and night legalized prostitution is traffickers by shielding it. More difficult to identify traffickers and use them. It's going to the traffickers involved the lack of illegal use work permits for women into the prostitution industry. They have the fact that women have been trafficked by clothes and then regarded themselves as migrant sex workers. Cease the point is profits. Day 12. Illegal forms of prostitution are trafficking exploited under a system of legalization for business prevents and makes sense for prevents trafficking. They exploit prostitution is legal. There's little notice for purpose even if trafficking is legal. D turns the trust and reporting are exposed. 10 and offshore trafficking also takes place in legal brothels. Legalization makes it easier for the trafficking because women are told the legality of the industry means the police will not be sympathetic to their complaints. Legalization of problems of discipline trafficking. But in court cases, the rest of the debate I'm just gonna make legal to the Swedish model because that's like literally their own answer. It fails. There's 13. It was severely criticized by the thorough student of prostitution research. There was a clear bias of methodological problems, contradiction, pollution were drawn without factual backup. The evaluation navigation of technical effects such as increased humanization, the entire levels of vulnerability in women, taking great risks, accepting low prices, and being able to demand safer sex out of women, instead of prostitution were negative for compensation, intensified the stigma. But only sexually false country by the police. According to this, the only way to resist sexual objectification was to say the purpose of criminalizing the crime was that the prostitution, an armor's penalty for the framing of prostitution is the form of violence against women leaves little room for the prostitute to not want to escape the response to the challenge of the view on prostitution is inherently exploitative for regarded the lack of its empirical makes it impossible to conclude whether the legislation had its intended purpose. Purchase sex experience involving body the antagonist, character experience complexity prostitution, produces stereotypical ideas of the sex worker. Swedish model feels the government study that they cite was flawed. Washington Times 14. The country's success is an illusion. Academics and experts say the numbers don't hold up. The Swedish model does not have a research supporting this concept. Australia, the government talks about 3,000 sex workers, much more than that. Australia updates faulty methodology 2010. Government study for inspiring message presented for a sex worker doesn't believe the prosecuting John says currently the main Swedish reports book according to sex workers. That number was laughable. The government isn't paying attention. Prostitution and street work prostitution is flourishing elsewhere. How do police find the crimes and its target as growth last day period? 124 sex workers, 36 reports about tax 20% for government warnings and police only 2 said and reported features attackable lot not just for because life and sex workers greater dangers. And it's all based on a demand reduction strategy which fails because supply produces demand. Their model doesn't solve the next works comprehensive studies. Carpenter 15. The IOM question whether demand for exists for trafficking resident of the fundamental classes is reflected by sex and the prostitutes working exploitation conditions. There is great demand for sex workers whose crimes perceived as being treated as jobs as the least substantive rights of abolition is made for women who follow the sub-high levels of violence and are responsible for fueling and trafficking. It's like the female with sex workers generates and negotiate how the criminalization now reduced made the review by notice the studies skill respect plans led to the conclusion that there is an relevance of abolition is more active in demand as zero tolerance policy to target to achieve prostitution means the vast majority of sexual commerce occurs indoors now. The show stuff, links to both sides. We agree tracking data has problems, but all available data goes in. We read 2 cards that are based on the most comprehensive data available from over 150 countries, whereas app is entirely based on optimistic conjecture and lacks any conclusive data. We have 626, correct?
I'm slightly confused about the Joe 13 evidence you're reading.
Sure.
It's saying how the Swedish model is biased. It's citing Ostergren.
Yes.
Then you're reading this Washington Times card, which then indicts Ostergren.
No, it doesn't. It says Ostergren blames faulty methodology on the Swedish government study. It's saying Ostergren thinks the government study is bad.
So is your argument all just based on this Ostergren study?
No, it also cites Jacobson as well as interviews with sex workers conducted by the Rose Alliance. The
Conducted by
partner
what
evidence
alliance?
also cites the International
Conducted by
Organization
what
for
alliance?
Migration.
Conducted by what alliance?
The Rose Alliance.
Okay. I first like to, I guess second, would like to talk about the counterplan, this Garcia evidence that you're saying goes negative. Lawrence holds that the Senate cannot make private sexual conduct a crime. The same could be true for private sexual conduct of buyers and sellers of sex. The context of this is Garcia is talking about how the court could extend it to do this. Where does it say that if we extend it only to selling, that it necessitates extending it to buying?
If you don't spill over even within the prostitution context, I have no idea how you solve the right to water. Like, that blows my mind.
Because none of our, well,
Like,
it really are. But if
I
you're,
will stick the debate on your lack of a card saying that we don't spill over within prostitution buying and selling, but do spill over to water.
well, the
I'm pretty
problem is
confident
you
in
don't
that.
have a card that says we do spill over, and you've read cards that say that the court will not rule it to spill over. So I'm not sure about why you want to
They're not as
stay the
good as
debate
your
on that.
YC card. We like our YC cards better.
Okay, tell me where in this Garcia card it says that legalizing selling necessitates legalizing buying.
It says the same could be true for private.
I know, I read that card a lot. The
What do you think?
context,
So, if
the
there's a right to
context of that is
privacy,
Garcia's talking about how we could do that. Our ultimatum
Yes,
and distinguishes
in the
this
same
says
way
that
that we
the
could
court
establish
wouldn't
right
do
to
that
water.
because the right to privacy extends to selling your body because there's no externality about it because you choose what happens to your body.
That's not a
But the right to
question.
buying one's body
That's
does
also
not
not a
hold the same
question.
because there are
This
things
isn't
like
a
coercion.
VAC. You're not even asking me questions. This is a process.
I'm trying to ask you how you think the Garcia line you read overcomes the
Yeah,
alternative.
so the thing about a constitutional right to privacy is that it cuts against arbitrary restrictions. If you've already established that prostitution is an area of privacy, then being a customer of a prostitute isn't very different. You know, they're both involved.
Okay, I
And
don't
it's
think
private
any
for the
of
seller,
your
it's
evidence
private
says
for the
that.
buyer. I don't see why that wouldn't make sense. Makes a lot of
I
sense.
now would like to talk about how cops are able to find prostitutes.
Yes.
Where does Jacobson get the idea? How does Jacobson conclude that cops are sufficient to find people that have been trafficked? Like in Hawaii recently, they did a whole study where they were like, okay, we're going to amount all the arrests, we're going to increase our look for trafficking. And all they found was that they arrested a fuck ton of prostitutes and never found any cases of trafficking. And it would be ludicrous to believe that there was no
You're
trafficking in
still not
Hawaii.
asking questions. This is just like a weird 3-minute VAC.
What, I just asked you.
Conditionality, topicality.
Good line. Right on time.
This is my kind of one there. I sent it back a while ago, so everyone should have it. The timer's tomorrow.
Not yours. It's under the tub. Squashing a lot of things.
There you go. Thanks.
Sorry, I just need to know the top.
check and expertise gap. Third, assessment is arbitrarily confined. Second is it promotes offense unique to the plan, whereas two easy skew is inept pulling even the deterrence unit. And
going to answer the new abstat stuff just because I want to feel like counterplay, and then I'm going to deal with all their offensive programming on my outline. So you might want it's sort of like an overview of that. But yeah. Is anyone good? No, sorry. No, Lisa, you asked that then it was just a new advantage, and we were prostitution proposals down one issue, reject the break. It's going to reject the argument. It's not a reason to reject the there's no short specs, also education tools, because you can just look for the main now. They're on the line, you still leave your short blocks far enough from leaping pivots to yourself that your mistake ground is inevitable. They still need the track, but they said they see nuance links. Also, they think that the Swedish model counterplay, the course the advantage counterplays, it's through the case. Also, millennium process counterplays, bi-directionality is never legalized, and everything else can say they restrain mountain prostitution that was conceded in this way. Also, education lost never conditionality means shallow debates that short circuit all other possible net benefits now. The limits of a top level you have conceded. Later, we will expressly concede their framing points by limits outlay literally everything. The Kelly limits indicates a number that are influential to all the predictable arguments it makes it. So, prostitution and crimes at 3,072 combos that Kelly limits talks about all these possibilities, which means yes, there was a site for all of the term that indicates that we plan all these frames. You should err affirm all these questions because the topics becoming still it's continued. These arguments also it's key to rest of the affirmative because having good debates perspective from what I see is necessary. No top level version of the affirmative there. Card just says that people solve we found all the reasons why would be able to suck now the meaning today. There are cards which are powerful scratch strokes in the question top levels most to be short affirmative explicitly. It actually says that it's legalization prostitution. Also, more of this is legalized prostitution worse than 15 of these cover national to this main laws, so the legalized women working in prostitution. Each directly to critical to promotion about sales sex and their arguments focus on the literature and context prove that we meet those standards. Now the definitions we said that prostitution is the offering self-sex or selling sex. Most states separately criminalize patrons and prostitution related activities. That's the distinction evidence in the paragraph itself. Prostitution affirmative ground. Most state policy affirmative is not prostitution. List topics limited most prostitution angle against all of their offense. Also forcing the absent fed prostitution related crimes both those student pics, pimping, pandering, brothels, trafficking. They're all insane prostitutes that should have that makes sense to be natural. That's misuse. This theory doesn't solve because of time enough evidence legalization keywords. This makes question of what prostitution is now after and outweighs good after prior requisites to debates because of the one I see if not if I'm wrong about that balance ground still outweighs because the first most fair and education based on preferred dictionary definitions principle because it's successful. It's an internal link to all their current limits arguments. They are contextual and specific only the laws and bills. Also, it's an impact towards legal definitions, i.e., we can expressly concede their argument that you should not pick and choose from the same sections. Now, prostitution is selling people sharing by prostitution for selling sexual money and sexual relations for money, medical sharing for sexual relations for money, and more evidence, Oxford 14, engagement for activity for payment, and even more direct definitions providing sex for rain, influence parties, direct definition, prostitution providing sex services for money, and the constitution instrument are prostitution based setting and like a structural arrangement. It's also selling only dealer, if the person is prostitution by engaging in sexual conduct for fee, prostitution law by people who sometimes John criminalize some kind of patronizing. They say, like all these, all their evidence and freedoms are about categories. That's bad. Lisa, precision, Kelly, love, there are true. Proposition, demolition, regulatory, more reasons about possible legalization, collation, more importantly, use of psychology, has to be about expression, that's what activities, individuals, or action, of criminalizing, normalizing what ways of possible use of technology are not only that, but frequently misleading reality. Most countries with some allegations of view, any prostitution in any of the context be able to be legal. Now, the legalization definition, right, it's just moving to prohibition or rules, evidence, okay, it's too topical here, it's always in process. Now, nearly all you've conceded evidence in the United States talks about how 90% of crackdowns occur on the prostitutes themselves. Means that we are nearly all you conceded definition means that most means that we're close enough now. If the interpretation is bad, it substantive crowd out, additionally, destroys the topic creativity, all their objectivity, because the judge have to read evidence. So the I law advantage, I'll concede that there's no spillover. It was already conceded in the 2AC. There's no answer to it. It doesn't take out our trafficking advantage because of journal fiat and all of them just about legalizing the selling of sex. This also proves whether answers to the permutation are wrong. They can take back the spillover arguments. Means that the Garcia evidence doesn't need to say about physics. Is that very sure regardless of because what could be instead of what it actually is. Of the trafficking top level, all of the conceded arguments by international cooperation working to solve it, and international cooperation outweighs kefir. It's introspective means addressing issues by tackling the problem. It is a tracing country right entries, arresting trafficking, parties, culture-driven investigation is fired by the trafficking should include greater international cooperation, which includes coordination, seizure, oppressive accuracy, profits, and developments, and educational program. Now, even if they out-tech me because I'm way slower than Ellis, it doesn't matter because they've conceded the index that literally every one of their cards includes affirmative, like their Cho evidence or Kurva evidence, which we read the conclusions from, or it is not about the planning themselves, means that all their things are wrong. They say police oversearch, that's answered by the fact that police don't really care at all. This for them is conceded day card. They say victim identification and money, the day evidence, they even scratched me their fault because it wasn't textual to the plan, and victim identification makes a question of it. Only we're able to solve trust and counterplan is not able to solve. I'll read evidence of it now. They conceded try now. They have no unique perception evidence are white evidence indicates only leaking when internal worst case scenario where a secondary church is able to suffer only other things that we solve. Victimization, you can see the empirical affirmative in these narrow cases, 50% are able to be solved. More evidence Nordic model is successfully able to solve this case with all their evidence that Nordic sucks, embers, enforcing lies and prostitution, prostitutes by women represented for creating race, pushing dress, because prostitution trafficking demand, this week's income, your next known question situation better than before those less trafficking fewer men, who is prostitution number prostitutes increase where, as another Christian numbers increase, we society no longer accepts this reviews more evidence demand approaching our best yet.
Actually, no, I want you to read the criminalization with.
All these, the alternative, all these things is criminalization, prostitution won't cooperate. That answers literally every one of their ones. Here's there's no cooperation. Your author, curve on 12 victims. We're not going to do the victimization. Our fixing law enforcement, deportation, hypothy, influence, turning instructors, through retribution, doing is willing to cooperate victims. Ultimate fear, trust, police, victims are told, they ask police, help them arrested, just trust warranted, police officers, reference, crisis, return, triggers, more corruption, victims, rep. They also recorded the counterplan. That was the 1AC internal, like it spins affirmative, and goes, now the counterplan. I'm not going for them either. Eventually, can't solve anything. It doesn't solve this advantage of these prostitution courts self-extend. That are evidence from the case that's out victim-centric after Jacobs said it's wrong. Initially, they read this Hegel's evidence. That was the one you can see that cops are lazy, so it's unable to be solved. Now, the permutation is to do the plan, and the course itself, they have no answer because we don't necessarily spillover. I conceded the no spillover argument means something not bad. Is that competitive? It also doesn't generate uniqueness. Do you want the spillover card or one more complex?
You want a reasonability on.
I already did that. We're good. Do you want the spillover card or courts?
No
spillover. Meaning Mercy Lawrence, except for privacy, privacy, trying to express over burden for no sexual liberty, Lawrence, given broad reading, privacy, interest in giving conversation, prostitution, Lawrence, could be lucky to be outside of me. Mark there also, reasonability, their answers to conditionality prove reasonability good, so they can't go back. I'm guessing that's the part.
If you're like me and you float on paper and you float the 1 hour overview at the top of the paper, you're gonna want a new sheet.
A little bit of a rant?
I like overview stacking. I mean, I just don't know how to make my overview correspond exactly where the overview ones are, and I don't want to try, so, do my best. And I'm actually going to go to the Iowa page first. Yeah.
Like before the overview or after the overview?
No, before the overview.
Okay.
Before.
Okay, first reads first. I got you.
Awesome. Are we good? Great. All right. Yeah, we'll concede none of our evidence applies. We'll concede legalization links that we spent all year researching don't apply. We'll concede all the legalization bad args are actually the app. I wonder why. T. The app is a topical. The long choice is very telling and should be a pretty good indicator of why they read it in the first place. Debate is about the quality of arguments, not the over-proliferation of cards that don't assume the context of the resolution or meaningfully reflect the core literature versus on controversy itself. That is kind of the point. Our impact outweighs one as they shred any and all negative ground. The core controversy standards of legalized versus decriminalized, which they eliminate entirely by reading an app that is functionally decrim. The 2AC no link on trafficking is instructed. Their curve rate is about increasing penalties on Johns as part of the proposal. The maintenance of these penalties gives them a strategic advantage that turns the side bias way too far on the app on a topic where there's already a normative consensus that prohibition is bad. They should face the strategic cost of activating the nuances of different mechanisms like they want us to is only possible when the app defends legalizing prostitution and better forces the debate on the core literature controversy. They concede on all of our name ground comes first arguments. It matters. The alternative to nuance and depth debates over decriminalization topic area these days is devolution into ultra generics like the CAP K and process CPs. Those are antithetical to topic education and result in shallow debates that disincentivize topic specific research, which is the only unique impact at all this year. Those debates are especially important for the prostitution context too. Is predictability. No part of the app is nearly all, which references the subsets of prostitutions, not crackdowns, which is irrelevant. FYI in this case, I want to see nearly all definitions says only extraordinary exceptions are allowed. Their counter definition is citing random 1800s literature, not the U.S. legal interpretation, which is really important. Predictability outweighs for those of you with teams still in this tournament. How will you feel when they suddenly start losing on small subsets apps or random carve-outs on every area of the topic proliferated all at once? It's imperative to hold the line on what nearly all means, otherwise sustained engagement is impossible. And even if the link to the offense is minor, it's multiplied by 5 factorial because of all the different ways it can be combined with different topic areas, which means that the offense exclusively goes negative on this. Now, the first argument that they make at the top is that we have ground as inevitable. Literally, the two examples they gave were the trafficking DA, which I mentioned above, and process CPs, which I've indicted. No new two-error examples for what the ground were. If we had some sweet substantive ground, do you really think we'd be hiding in quarters of the NDT? Next argument, bidirectionality. This is false. The legalization app, even if it has onerous restrictions on stuff like where you can sell it, it's still an increase in legal supplies because there is zero legal supply in the status quo, even if it's not infinite legal supply. That is why it's not decrim. The second argument is this just doesn't justify them cheating, even if people read wacky apps. They shouldn't open the floodgates to it because it means that there is no recourse to it and they can't access any of their offense because all the things about what debate should be like or what we should be doing in those can't be accessed at the NDT where there is limited time to engage every infinite deviation in the literature. The next argument is that they say they concede that limits outweigh everything. Our no Pappas loves that type of shit, but he actually never said that. We never said limits outweigh anything. Our argument is that the limits need to be equitable and predictably grounded in the literature of the controversy, not random state statutes or laws from the 1800s that you get to handpick because then our research burden becomes unlimited. I have to know every criminal code, every common law argument, or every arbitrary dictionary definition which has no intent to find, whereas our argument is based on the 40 years of literature debate within the feminist movement who has compared these alternatives and is the basis for any negative research. When you go to cut a case net for prostitution, you don't start by looking at the differences between the Connecticut state statutes in Michigan. You look at what the people in the prostitution literature defend, which explicitly distinguishes a Swedish model from legalization. It describes legalization as a regulated system where both the buyer and the seller can participate, not subject to certain regulations. The app is just a form of decrim that decriminalizes the seller but not the buyer, which proves that they don't access any of this. Also, even if they have narrow definitions, that's not the same as limits. It just means that it's even more arbitrarily unlimited. The next thing is the topic is stale versus 5 app topics are empirically the best. The implicit staleness argument is false because apps have successfully defended core proposals in each area all year, yet there's still advantage innovation in depth debates where both sides prepare which creates better class 2, even if it's only 5 biases decisively out because they have all separately bases. General normative bias, marijuana is a topic unto itself, net generics don't exist, and most of the things being legalized occur in the school. 3 expansions uniquely bad at the NDT. That was about we already have a huge written kicking pace with innovation within the topic. Don't make us do it without the topic because it wipes out net correct purely for the sake of novelty. Now the next argument is the literature proves no, the literature is explicit. about why the reality of prostitution is better guide than arcane legal standards, that is our Alexander evidence and lay evidence and the Munaf evidence, which explicitly identifies that they've also conceded the topical version argument. The Ahmed card is comparative and identifies things like legal workplace regulations as a viable alternative to the Swedish model. Sure, it might not be perfect, but the argument for, oh, this app would have DAs to it is kind of our point. The next argument is Pixar bad versus nearly all checks. We couldn't pick out of anything random and arbitrary like the colors of clothing people wear, because that would meet the extraordinary exception clause. Second is their antidote to what our lack of ground is stupid picks anyway. So this is moot. Third is, what are these sweet picks? I wish I knew before about the debate. The Swedish model argument is net ground, and most others don't apply because they choose what regs they put in their plain text. So we obviously can't pick out of tiny things that didn't specify. The next argument is all of the dictionary definitions. None of their cards really say, oh, they wanted to hear the Duthel card define 0 words in the reg resolution. The Perry evidence is based on 30 years ago in early American law when we still had stuff like slavery and anti-sodomy laws, which probably shouldn't be the basis for research. The dictionary cards that all make the question because they can see the distinction between defining prostitution versus defining the legalization of prostitution. Granted, Johns are prostitutes. We're not idiots, but we do know that the legalization of prostitutes has to include prostitution, which involves someone having sex with someone else. That in this dictionary is bad. It's a one-sentence definition that doesn't reflect the reality of the literature base, which means it's not a good basis for debate. The cards also don't even really go out. The medical one and the Oxford one say engaging or indulging in that. The John does that too, so that would be included. Their diddlier evidence is about Connecticut exclusively, and it's about the nuances between stuff like pimping and pandering laws, which proves that we can't be expected to keep up with all of that. The next argument is Cali. It's not about all contexts, it's about all prostitutions. In some contexts, for instance, you can have an app that says all prostitution is legal, but it has to be zoned. That's the Nevada model, which is defined in the literature. That's legalization. The next argument is rules they conceive this card doesn't apply at all. It's not about the context of prostitution, but all of our evidence, and it totally begs the question of what legalizing prostitution is, which is all about. Last argument is nearly all 90%. 90% doesn't meet its extraordinary exception. That's the Federal Register stuff, consensus of the federal government. Also totally begs the question. All the reasonability stuff also begs the question because they're not reasonable. That's why I'm going for T. Reasonability is about what's reasonable for the app, and negative. If we went a link to any of our offense, it turns all of theirs and proves that they set an unreasonable expectation.
207? 207.
Go, yeah.
And then just knock on the door.
I'll,
Or we could put a
yeah,
chair.
Yeah, the third will.
Third door.
I'm a good doorstep.
That's about all they're good for.
Oh, wow. L for love.
No, I understand. Yeah, I mean, I heard the noise that,
Yeah.
that your pants made. Is this your shoe? Yep.
Marcia, grab my flip flop.
I'm gonna do my thing and then I'm gonna do his overview. And then I'm gonna do some stuff. Are you ready? Reading evidence against the affirmative that doesn't respond does not mean that the affirmative is not topical. They had cards in their toolbox that were responsive to the Swedish models. For some reason, the truancy just decided not to read them. The internal linking attorney and trying to anticipate limits that way there's a foundation to make the negative interpretation massively expand the scope of affirmative fiat from 3 to 3,072 possible affirmative mechanisms, and that is before regulation is easy to even count. They don't get to say over impact numbers because it was their impact calculus in the 1 and C, and we took them up on the challenge of the 2AC. The 1 and R can 2 and R are not able to pull back limits, turn negative ground, infinite affirmatives, decrease the amount of predictability and generics that are available to the negative. Also means that internally turns predictability, it turns all of their education elements, which is the terminal impact to be a stable mechanism that has in-depth literature upon it there, and that has in-depth room for classroom through research. Are we able to properly respond? Just because the negative spent all year researching things that don't apply to our affirmative or miss the boat on the topic doesn't mean we're not topical. It just means that maybe D-Hyde should have called the prostitution that instead of Alice. Now, the reason are ended with the tautology saying reasonability is about what's reasonable for the affirmative, and the negative does not actually a response to reasonability. All of our limits are disproved by we create an interpretation that is reasonable for the negative and the affirmative. All of this also begs the question of picks. You could pick out of options for the government actor, options for selling sex, options for buying sex, options for procurement of sex, options for pimping, options for brothels. All of these are picks that exist within the negative answers. They're only answer in the negative one was that we don't have a citation for this offense. That's not true. It's the Kelly evidence. All of these combinations that the negative can pick out of are also combinations of affirmative, because their interpretation includes all of those things of prostitution. The factorial of that is 3,072, which should just be horrible for the negative. Ours is just 4 options for selling and 3 actors, which the factorial of that is 12, which is a much more stable mechanism for the negative. All their arguments about how there's 5 different topic areas and 5 factorial would be horrible leads to our offense, because they magnify that by increasing it. We just make it so there's only 12 possible affirmatives within the realm of 1 of the 5 topic areas, which is much more debatable. Now, reasonability is best. This topic was created for affirmative innovation. That is why the actor was listed, or the actor was listed in the United States, and why there were multiple topic areas. They have not provided the fact that we have definitions that counter all of theirs to prove that prostitution could be this, proof that there is a reasonable interpretation that shows that this is the best way you can go to the NDT. And we have read this affirmative before. Going for topicality just isn't the way they do it. It just isn't something that should happen, because there's no deterrent effect you're going to set. There's like 2 more rounds. Their overview. Basic negative ground legal versus decriminalization. I explained why we internally turn negative ground legal versus decrim is something that you could read against the affirmative by only removing criminal sanctions on the selling of sex and not the civil ones, which is what the definition of decriminalization is. There are nuance of mechanism arguments. I have already internally turned why you can only get to nuance of the mechanism with the more limited interpretation that the affirmative has, because they have too many options for police enforcement that the negative can pick out of, which decrease the amount of mechanism and we went for D because this topic just fundamentally sucks. Advantage from the rights does not exist. The negative can go for the UN counterpoint against marijuana to always beat them, just like Michigan always does to us. The NDT, they have a research program for the negative, but that is inevitable with advantages, which means that you don't solve that anyways. Or generics don't solve because the affirmative will always make a new mechanism, which means that only we solve through a limited topic. What?
T version of the F in your law.
Topical version of the F is not sufficient to solve their evidence. Just says that we didn't see there would be dissents to it. It doesn't solve what the affirmative read, which is our core advantage of arguments about right to privacy being good, which doesn't extend to selling the sex, and about how only the affirmative solves trafficking. It also would lead to all of our limits offense, which is what we are going for in the debate. The nearly all debate we need our free dictionary evidence says that nearly all is contextual, says that nearly all is about the selling of sex. It's also begs the question of the broader prostitution debate, which we have. One should only be the selling of sex. It's like it's minorly different from the one before, but the plan in the doc is correct.
Okay. I didn't know you read it before. That's not what I was going to say.
The plan is the United States include the prohibition of selling sex and violence, right to privacy, and like that. Just wanted to double check on all that. So.
All right.
But I sent out the doc. Anyone needs anything else? Let me know. I put the plan in just in case. Yep. Yep.
weeks over.
You getting stressy in over here?
I don't know how I feel about that.
Just a quick tea.
It's really being very loud.
I thought I was hallucinating for a second. Both of them started hallucinating. That
He's omnipresent.
I
terrifying.
just realized that this totally explains Joe Crowder.
Now I know myself.
That was BS.
Change the debate, it is a 5-0 decision for the negative.
I guess I'll go ahead and start then. I think that ultimately this has been an interesting debate in a lot of regards. I decided that the negative interpretation basically provides a clearer direction for preparation and competitive equity about debates over prostitution, and also potentially topic education as well, given that hypergenerics are kind of the result the negative is forced into if their best and most strategic options are taken away by the affirmative. I guess I'll say two small things kind of about the way the 2AR and 1AR evolve and go through some of the most important parts of the debate. The first is that the 2AR is a bit too embedded flash for my tastes on a topicality debate. I think it might behoove you to think about what your interpretation is sort of like in the word of resolution. The way I basically put it together is that only your affirmative is topical, which is like your limits is said, right, to the negative, like we remove penalties, that's what legalization means, removal of penalty for prostitution, which is the sale of sex. So given those two things, I can only conclude that your affirmative is the only topical one. I think if you had maybe said it in those terms and leveraged it earlier in the debate, then the limits dissect would be very clear, right? Like the 1AR is like, we're functionally defining the way that the debate should go down as only our act is topical. That's the conclusion that you should draw from our evidence and the interpretation of the words that we have defined. I sort of conclude that anyway, because your evidence does that. But I think that the way the negative characterizes some of the limits arguments is that it's not just about the sheer number, right, of affirmatives that are allowed, but also the content and style of those affirmatives, and then the direction of preparation. So I think one of the other interesting things here is that the general approach, right, versus the specific implementation frameworks and the regulatory necessity, et cetera, the negative is winning, I think, some really good arguments about the limits. Here we go. About why limits need to be predictable and things that shape predictability. There are three things I think here. First is that the advocates of strategies, right, and legalization frameworks specifically talk about different types of legalization, decriminalization, partial decriminalization, etc. This isn't totally damning for you, but it does shape, I think, the way that the literature guides research and the education that comes and the competitive equity component as well. And then second is that it's important not only to understand how those strategies are defined by the literature, but also the way that the phrase should be interpreted, legalization of prostitution. So I get legalization definitions from you, I get prostitution definitions from you, but I don't have the definition of what legalization of prostitution means. And I think that the negative cards here are just really, really good, and they have a lot of them. And so it's tough for me, right? It would be very tough to tell Michigan here that they just couldn't win the legalization of prostitution, somehow didn't require, right, the things that their evidence, I think, explicates very well. And so almost, the one small comment for the negative here is it's almost close enough to be like a jurisdictional claim on topicality, given how good their evidence is. And, it's obviously not something they say, so it's not somewhere I go. But then the third, too, is nearly all, right, which provides another way to interpret and understand, right, how we limit it. So I don't think there's a huge limits disad, for example, right, to their interpretation, is what I'm saying.
But doesn't nearly all just beg the question of what prostitution means? Like, I get why if we win nearly all,
Well, they
like
make
that
the question.
selling is nearly all, prostitution would be bad for
Yes.
them. But if they win nearly all, we just then have to win prostitution.
Yeah, nearly all modifies prostitution. What I'm saying is that in order to win a large limits disad or negative interpretation, which is what you're going for in the 2AR, you would also need to win that there aren't other words in the resolution that would limit out this
It's like,
law.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, exactly. So nearly all is an extraordinary exception, which means that those like 3,072 affirmatives that your evidence is talking about, I don't really think it's a risk, right, with the negative interpretation. So ultimately, I think that they win basically that the specificity of their evidence should guide the interpretation here, and the competitive equity is better preserved in a situation right, where their preparation hasn't been so defined. I think that, I'll reiterate one suggestion. Had you described it earlier as like, look, we're predictable because of the way, right, that it's described in the literature and our interpretation provides a better pathway for limits, then I think maybe that if you had packaged it that way earlier and then specifically responded to, right, like this nearly all means that the limits to set is not unique, they address your Kelly argument, and then it's like, and they provide examples like Emory's Act, this regulation act that doesn't really, create as many problems for the negative, which is what you're like, it's so much worse, right? They're basically like, we're willing to accept the risks, we'll take the regulations, debate if we must. And then one other thought, I guess, here is that it was strange to me, but the negative also doesn't even really need to win that regulation is somehow a component, right? As long as they win the sale of sex argument. So I thought that the 2NR, there's never a description of it this way, but there's also a possible way where the negative would win simply that prostitution requires both the sale and purchase of sex. Right, that's not where I vote. I basically vote on just like the predictable, like their evidence describes legalization frameworks. But I think you should be careful in limiting out a judge's interpretation and basically guide the ballot a little bit better in describing the circumstances for which, right, you would need to meet those, I think, definitions. Because they're also debating on the prostitution component. I think the 2NR you should say, even if we lose legalization as regulation, just be like, prohibition is fine. Their regulation just doesn't apply to us. Prostitution is just purchase and sale of sex. There's only one affirmative here, right? We're just saying it has to be bigger so we get our limits. And that would be like, no limits to this, that. See, and I don't, I don't look that way. That's one pathway provided by the evidence that's given here.
Do you think that this stuff about, like our definitions are better, could be a little bit more affirmative? Can we just start earlier on the contextual solvency advocate definition is bad? Because I do feel like when you go and read something by like Raymond or Lynn or Yang or all the different prostitution advocates, they all say, for the sake of this article, I define abolition as this, and then I define prohibition as this, and I define legalization as this, and I define decriminalization as this, and they all define it differently. But I just felt like we maybe didn't quite explain that enough until the 2AR.
I agree that should be on earlier, but in this particular round, I do think that they have 2 or 3 different sources to make that same argument that if there are still criminal penalties against Johns, then prostitution hasn't been legalized.
Mm-hmm.
That I can't remember the one that starts with a D something card. The Marnafe card, I thought was the best card for that. I mean, it even says, the Swedish model is not legalization because it leaves those penalties in place. And so for me, there were 2 key things. First is that only they had an interpretation that sort of gave meaning to the phrase legalization of prostitution. You're just debating over and over again what prostitution means. And I think you can make this a little bit clearer by saying, the fact that states have 2 different parts of their laws, one part that deals with the selling and one part that deals with the buying, doesn't mean that both of those aren't relevant to the legalization process. They may win that states have defined prostitution in terms of the prostitute one way, and buying prostitutes in terms of the John in another way, and define those as 2 separate crimes. But our evidence says that the criminal penalties for both of those have to be lifted. So you can grant all of their definitions, and if your definitions of legalization are correct, then it sort of subsumes those definitions. And the second thing that I thought that I didn't think you were specifically addressing well enough that resonated the most for me was their second standards argument, or reason to prefer their interpretation, that that your interpretation sort of skirted what the primary area of controversy is in this field, given that nobody really defends that the prohibitions are good, that all the meat of the debate is about whether we should have decrim or legalization, and so we should be very strict about making sure that you stay on the legalization side so that we can get at the core of the literature.
I was just going to say, largely agree with what Sherry and Will said. For me, it's more, and in addition to that, it's lack of defending why switching sides is good, right? I don't know what the controversy is in the debates about legalization of prostitution that's outside of this broad abolitionist versus
Do you think, and I know this argument like really wasn't construed out that much, do you think like the start of the one argument that again needs to be fleshed out more of like, even if that's true, there's education, like that seems to be like an education dissent, that's inevitable because of notions of conditionality, only housing those debates with the affirmative allows in-depth discussions. If like people change throughout the years, so sometimes you're fully legalizing.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay.
I mean, I do, yeah.
I know that's like not there. It was more just like academic.
It wasn't at all.
Yeah.
Like, no, we're not mad.
Yeah, one small thing you can do too is that all the evidence is very good at finding phrase legalization of prostitution, but there is a bit, right, of ambiguity about whether or not it applies, because you're not quite the Swedish model, right? You are legalization, not decriminalization. So you could say, we envision a different model, right, that none of their evidence takes into account for.
That's what's
right?
Because
And
really
so-
that's not
so-
legalization,
yes,
because
it
it
is
increases
legalization.
penalties on the
Yeah.
drug.
They describe it as decriminalization, but no, they still give a civil penalties comparison. That would be a richer comparison because we do have a legalization framework. It's just the scope has been limited. And then in the argument why we should focus solely on prostitution, right, rather than the exchange. So it's just like supply side, focus is better for education, et cetera. Then I think you can get back in the game a little bit because then I can say, well, all their definitions are about decriminalization frameworks, not the type of thing from that.
I wish this was a prelude to the quarters, just some thoughts.
Yeah, I know, sorry.
Dropping knowledge.
Yeah. Only a second comment is I do think that their definitions, I think, are a little bit better. You give them credit for. They have 2 cards that I think are an attempt to define it. And they actually, say, given that you're right, that we have all of these contradictory either operational interpretations or legal definitions of these terms, like implicit point out, which include the fact that the word prostitution doesn't appear in criminal or civil codes in several states. That given all this confusion, here's a constructive way of organizing it, and then it orients that way of organizing the literature about the controversy should be legal or not in relationship to legalization which applies to the process itself. So maybe a way of saying, at least to me, this decision is I think you make prostitution legal, but I don't think you legalize it because you don't address or process, which is what about the jobs. Right?
Yeah, I agree with much of what's been said before, and I also I agree strongly with your instinct that you should be pushing back against this against the sort of comparative standard debate in which they say that the center of the literature is defined by X. I think that it's ultimately somewhat perverse that they're able to get away with saying that what's really a mutable international literature is capable of defining of setting the bounds of predictability better than a dictionary. Even if the state statutes are somewhat contradictory, I still think that actually probably sets a more precise bound than the literature. But I think that they do, I think that Michigan does a very good job of selling that as a standard that takes a lot of sort of your comparisons into account. And of also then tying that to the impact of debate research as well. And that ultimately I find pretty compelling. That's the way that I'm able to, that governs a lot of my reading of your various definitions of prostitution, as well as the fact, although this doesn't receive quite as much airplay in Michigan, that they have the only evidence that defines legalization of prostitution. You have a great deal of evidence that defines prostitution, but it's possible that legalization of prostitution, because it has to encompass so many, potentially subsidiary but still relevant activities, is a slightly different quantity. I think that the other sort of framing question where Michigan gets ahead is their comparison of predictability limits. I think that they're able to issue that as a comparative claim, and I think that you bank pretty heavily on granting the fact that he said that limits are most important. He said something about limits. I didn't have this as quite as absolutist claim as it's characterized in later speeches. And certainly there are a bunch of different claims about which one is most important, and so they're able to select within those. I think that pushing back against predictability, perhaps capturing that standard and setting parts of that debate up a little bit earlier and using that as your sort of impact framing question would be potentially helpful.
Yeah. I largely agree with most of what was said. I think I just want to emphasize that, the problem for me started with the just disjointedness of all of your different definitions. I think that if you all are going to be like prostitution is X, legalization is X, nearly all is X, then you have to at least start the framing argument in the 2AC and by definitely the 1AR of why I shouldn't be concerned with those terms interrelated to one another, and at least just like push back on their interpretation a little bit more, because they just sort of keep saying like, these are just debates that are happening in feminist literature. Okay, well, why is that maybe not perhaps as good as like feminist jurisprudence? Like, does this have to have any relationship to legal code, to law, or is this just a bunch of feminist scholars having an academic discussion, and how might that change the, you know, the limits or the bounds on the topic? And I just think that you have to, in some way, just push back against some of these claims a little bit earlier, because at the point where they are the only ones that have legalized prostitution in context, you either have to be like, that only allows for one AF and that is bad, or that, you know, or that definition is bad to begin with because of the source of where it comes from. And so I think you have to do one of those two strategies in order to make your interpretation seem viable, given that you don't have a card that sort of solidifies it all at once. But yeah, I largely agree, and I won't just talk for the sake of talking, so yeah.
One last comment, I guess, and that's that the regulation is just simply prohibition. Could have been a method by which you approach getting rid of some of their specific evidence, because all the feminists assume there must be a regulatory framework. So you could have been like, no, in fact, it would be Richard's debate prostitution absence of regulatory framework, and then just went like P, right? Because you like don't have to include regulation, and then most of their definitions would just already assume that. So if you want that argument, would miss the portion of their evidence.
I just want to say thank you all. We've had everyone like obviously like a variety of different times, like to different extents, but I think every time it's been really helpful. We got some really good feedback, so thanks for that.
I'm sorry, I thought you voted for you.
It's okay. Meet next year. It'll be okay.
Ever?
Hey, we got you for Dartmouth.
Yeah.
That was the first
Oh, that's
time
right,
I
I think Dartmouth.
That's good.
I judge you all at like 20 seconds.
I don't think I've ever judged you all before as a team, and I thought this was a great debate. I thought it was a funny debate, as well as an intricate and you know, really smart debate. And it's a joy for me to see debate in which everybody agrees about their normative end goal,
Yeah.
which is